You've heard these drums across some of the most iconic hip-hop records. But what most producers don't realise is how these classic breaks were rediscovered and passed down to an entire generation of beatmakers. In the mid-80s, two Bronx natives, one a DJ, the other a record collector, came together to preserve the sound they grew up with. And in doing so, they inadvertently shaped the sound of hip-hop's new sample-based era.
It's like the Bible of hip-hop, man.
The Wikipedia of breakbeat collections.
The holy grail of anything that samples.
This is the story of the legendary Ultimate Breaks and Beats compilation. The story begins in the Bronx, summer of 1973. At a back-to-school party on Sedgwick Avenue, DJ Kool Herc used two turntables to extend the breaks on funk records, and hip-hop was born. Just a few blocks away was our first main character, Louis Flores, also known as Breakbeat Lou. And his love of drums started early, learning to play the congas at just 3 years old. He grew up on the doorstep of hip-hop, and it was his older sister who dragged him along to one of those early park jams, a moment that would change his life.
My real punch in the face was guys like Flash, and I said I wanted to do that, so then I started DJing in 74. I would get on the crate and rocking, but it was only just in the bedroom kind of situation.
He was so young at the time he had to stand on a milk crate just to reach the decks. But from that moment he was hooked, digging through the crates, learning to blend breaks, and figuring out what made those records move the crowd. By 1978 he'd landed his first gig, but it came with a twist.
Did what we call a hooky party, and it was in a basement. We used to run out of school at 10 o'clock, go hang out. So we had a party from 10 to 2, and that was the first paying gig.
Across the city, our second main character, Lenny Roberts, or Breakbeat Lenny, was unknowingly about to stumble across a gold mine. Originally from Brooklyn, but now based in Soundview, he wasn't battling on the decks like Lou, but he was a record head, always digging. And one night in the late 70s, somebody asked him to DJ a party. He spanned the hits of the day, track after track, but the dance floor stayed empty. What Lenny didn't realise that night was that his son, now part of Africa Bambaata's Zulu Nation, held the key to what was really getting people going: breakbeats. If that was what got the crowds going, those were the records he needed to hunt down. He became obsessed, digging for break-heavy vinyl in bulk, from cut houses, record stores, wherever he could. His hustle and his instinct for what worked earned him a rep as some sort of breakbeat oracle.
Lenny's, to me, godfather of digging, man. He was the guy that had the records. He's the guy that, because of love that he had for his son, got consumed by hip-hop.
Now fast forward to the early 80s and hip-hop was evolving. What started in parks and basements built on raw drum breaks and turntable wizardry was now making its way onto wax. Rap records were hitting shelves, and slowly DJs were spinning those instead of the original breaks that had helped build the culture. It was around this time that Lou and Lenny first crossed paths at SOS Record Pool, one of New York's go-to hubs for DJs to grab records and swap notes. During one of the sessions, Lou casually mentioned a rare break, and Lenny perked up because not many people knew it. Right there, a connection sparked. The culture was shifting fast. Rap was on wax, but the breaks that built it were gathering dust. So they made a plan: preserve the past before it slipped away. For most DJs at the time, tracking down the original breakbeat records was almost impossible. They were out of print, expensive, or buried in deep crates. So bootlegs started filling the gap. Pressed in small runs and sold under the counter, they kept the sound alive. And the first to really make noise was Super Disco Breaks, released by Paul Winley. Rough sounding, cheaply pressed, but full of gold. And that gave Lenny Roberts an idea. Under his new label Bozo Miko, he pressed up a 12-inch that took things even further. Side A was Grandmaster Flash's legendary beatbox routine. But side B was where it really got interesting.
The birth child of everything was these. Fusion beats, Bozo Miko, Flash to the beat. Now, the reason I say this is the brainchild of everything was because on the B side was this thing called Fusion Beats. And it was a pause tape made by Africa Islam. So by us creating this particular thing, gave Lenny the insight that we should create albums like Paul Winley, but just make sure they were more to the grassroots essence of the culture.
Those early records were messy and unofficial, but they sold, and they sparked what came next, the octopus breaks. To avoid legal trouble, they were pressed anonymously, but they weren't just random funk records thrown together. These were the foundation breaks, the kind DJs had been spinning. But by 1984, the scene was shifting. Drum machines were on the rise, sampling was taking off. Now DJs weren't just playing breakbeats, they were flipping them. Then came the twist. Lenny walked into the Music Factory, popular Times Square store run by Stanley Platzer, a walking encyclopedia of breakbeats. Behind the counter, Stanley kept a blue binder. On the front, uptown music and old school beats. Inside, a handwritten archive of every break anyone had ever asked for. A kind of sacred scroll for diggers.
The rappers come in there and buy all their breaks from me. Eric B comes in there and buys his breaks from me, and he makes records from them. And KRS-One, and the Boogie Down Productions comes in there regular.
When Stanley asked if Lenny had any more of the Octopus records, something clicked. If one of the most connected record dealers in the city was still getting calls about those old bootlegs, maybe they weren't just some dusty relic and the demand was still there. The breakbeat era wasn't over, it was just evolving. And it wasn't just DJs anymore, producers were now in the picture.
What started happening is that Marley Marl stumbled on the sampling aspect where he sampled Impeach the President. So people started looking for these original sounds again because the new face of hip-hop was becoming back to the original organic.
Sampling had cracked things wide open. By 1986, Lenny and Lou had seen enough to know the culture needed something more permanent. No more bootlegs, no more under-the-counter runs. It was time to build a proper archive. And the first edition of Ultimate Breaks and Beats featured 6 tracks, but they weren't just any tracks. And this time the edits were handled by Lou himself with the help of Chet Nunez, a master of the razor blade and a pioneer of multi-track tape editing.
We used to do it at the SOS record pool where I met Lenny. We started editing there at a 7 RPS, old Tascam reel-to-reel. Having partnered one of the best editors in the game, Chet Nunez.
With Chet's input and Lou's growing skill, the edits became sharper, tighter and more consistent. Intros were extended, drums were beefed up, and breaks were looped with precision. Some tracks like Amen Brother were even slowed from 45 to 33 RPM, giving the break more weight and stretching the groove. That slower version would go on to be one that producers would sample to this day. Once the edits were locked, the masters went to Colton Batts at Frankfurt Wayne, the same engineer who'd later mastered Biggie's Ready to Die and Outkast's 80 Aliens.
It was just very convenient to have all these hard-to-find breaks and very cost-effective on one record, and they sounded really good. I don't know how to EQ'd it or mastered it, but in some cases it would sound better than the original.
But they didn't stop at the audio. Artwork was printed by Ross Ellis in Canada, and the records, they were pressed at Speciality in Pennsylvania, which was a Warner Brothers owned plant at the time.
We made sure that we were giving a proper product for the industry for the way it was, to make sure that it represented hip-hop in the best way possible.
For a generation of young producers, it was more than a record series. It was their gateway drug.
Ultimate Beats and Breaks is like the start of my career. I used to have all the volumes lined up on the wall like 1 through 10, and you fiending out when you come in the next time you're gonna see 11 near 10, and you go scoop 11, and then when you scoop 11, hopefully when you go back in there the next time you're gonna see 12 near 11, and you know, it was real addictive.
Right, a quick little break before we jump into the series' impact on producers. If you're into soulful, vintage-inspired samples, you can check out our sample packs over on our website. And right now, all the packs are buy one, get one free if you just use the code SECONDCOURSE at checkout. And if you want to check the packs out, the link for those is in the description. Anyway, let's get back to the important stuff. Once the Ultimate Breaks and Beats volumes hit the streets, a new generation of producers discovered the cornerstones of hip-hop. From New York to LA, beatmakers were now working from the same sonic toolkit, a curated set of break beats, carefully chopped and primed for the sampler. The sound of hip-hop was being built from the same foundations, just flipped 1,000 different ways.
Ultimate Breaks and Beats made it much easier for the beginners to get in the game, and it was like a big brother kind of thing. I know you ain't got no idea where these beats is coming from or nothing, but yo, here, we gonna package these up.
The compilation started spreading fast. landing in the hands of producers all over the world.
Soon as you get to the Paul C period, the Boogie Down Productions Criminal Minded period, the early Paid in Full period, suddenly you notice like everyone's using the same thing.
Even the West Coast couldn't ignore it.
The first person to actually sell that was Steve Yano. He sold records over the Rhodium swap meet over in Gardena. And that's pretty much a swap meet where Dr. Dre would make his infamous Rhodium mixtapes. NWA's first album straight out of Compton was made off of Ultimate Breaks and Beats.
And it wasn't just the source material they were using. Some producers grabbed loose edits straight from the record as is.
Raw Bass and Easy Rock made It Takes Two, but their sample sources came directly.
Dude, the original doesn't go nowhere near that. There's an edit that was done with this.
I wanna rock right now. I'm Raw Bass and I came to get down. I'm not internationally known.
Behind the scenes, Ultimate Breaks and Beats records were fueling records from Biggie to Nas to Naughty by Nature, and even crossing over to the UK to shape entire genres like drum and bass and jungle.
Those were the first records that I went to New York to buy when I was 17, to go to places like Downtown and Rock and Soul and get these compilations, because it was sort of like finding a blueprint to the music.
And while producers would later talk about their influence, at the time it wasn't something you shouted about. Everyone used them, but you didn't always give up your sources. After a while, certain records stopped being just songs. They became code words in hip-hop's sample vocabulary. Amen, impeach, think, funky drummer, synthetic, long red. You didn't need to say anything more. Everyone knew what you meant.
It was the spark. It was somebody giving you a head start on breaks. The manual to start collecting breaks, because you started off with them and they was putting all these extraordinary records on different volumes and you always ran to get the different volumes. It just made you want to find the greatest records that was on there and start collecting records by that artist.
The series ran for 25 editions between 86 and 91 before Lenny and Lou brought it to a natural close. What began as a bootleg project for two vinyl lovers became the unofficial curriculum for a generation of producers. Ultimate Breaks and Beats was their way of keeping the culture alive. And for countless kids with samplers, it was the first time they really understood what records their heroes had been spinning all along. And if you're a producer into this kind of thing, chopping samples, talking music, joining beat battles, we've got a whole community of producers and beat makers in our Loop Kitchen Discord. We'd love to see some of you there, and the link for that is in the description.